In the Viking Age, an era of fearless seafarers and valiant warriors, not only conquerors, but also legends were born, whose stories continue to inspire great deeds. Imagine a young warrior just beginning his journey, ready to board a long ship bound for unknown shores. The unknown beckoned him, and a thirst for wealth and recognition propelled him forward. In his hands, a sword; in his heart, faith in the gods, and that was enough to defy fate. Like many Vikings before him, he was willing to risk everything for honor and his family. As the ship cut through the icy waters, the young warrior reflected on his father's teachings, on tales of battles and the gods who rule the world. Yet he understood that the true battle occurred not only on the field, but deep within the soul. Every action he took, every decision he made, was a reflection of his loyalty to his people, a desire to leave a mark on history, much like those who built empires and forged eternal values. Then the outlines of new lands appeared on the horizon, and the youth's heart beat faster. He knew this was not merely a conquest, but the fulfillment of destiny. In the heat of battle, as his axe cleaved enemies and his sword gleamed in the sun, the warrior realized that true glory lay not only in victory, but in the knowledge that his deeds, courage, and honor would live on for ages after his last breath. His journey was far from over, but each step brought him closer to immortality, and like all Vikings, he understood that one day his name would become legend and nothing else would matter. For history is written by the brave. Erik, a young Viking, felt the weight of destiny as he prepared for trials in distant lands. As the ship touched the shore of the unknown island, the sound of waves echoed in his ears. His eyes, once full of doubt, now burned with resolve. He understood that the true test would be not only physical strength, but also the resilience of his spirit. Every step he took on this new land would be proof of his courage, but Erik sought more than just land and wealth. He craved the respect of the great chieftains, those he dreamed of one day standing beside among history's greatest warriors. As he ventured deeper into the unfamiliar land, Erik recalled the words of his father, a revered chieftain. "A true warrior fears not death, but dishonor." These words were etched into his memory, making him view the world with even greater determination. For several days, he faced trials that tested his resilience, from dense forests to skirmishes with wild beasts. But the most important battle was yet to come, a confrontation with a fierce warrior, the chieftain of an enemy tribe who threatened the land Erik and his companions had set foot upon. This chieftain's name was Ragnar, and tales of his invincibility spread faster than the wind. Erik knew this clash would be the true test of his bravery and spirit. On the day of battle, an ominous silence settled over the field. Erik looked at his companions, each with their own story and aspirations, and remembered his father's words: "The true battle takes place in a man's heart before it erupts on the battlefield." He understood that victory depended not so much on the strength of the arms, on the fortitude of the spirit. With the first battle cries, Erik thought not of victory or defeat, but of the legacy he and his sword would leave on that field. Honor was his only reward, and he was ready to fight for it until the end. When the battle ended, Erik stood, breathing heavily, his body covered in wounds. The struggle with Ragnar, the chieftain of the enemy tribe, had been more difficult than he had anticipated, but the sound of his sword piercing Ragnar's defenses was like music to Erik. He had won, not by brute force, but by the strength of a spirit that had not faltered in the most challenging moment. The weight of victory did not immediately overwhelm him, but brought a strange sensation. The triumph was not just in defeating an enemy, but in conquering something greater. Erik realized that by defeating Ragnar, he had not only gained land, but also a place in the pantheon of the greatest warriors in Viking history. In the days that followed, Erik received the recognition he had sought. His name spread among the tribes, and the great chieftains he had once revered now saw him as an equal. He was hailed as a hero, and his axe, which had once symbolized only war, now became a symbol of his strategic prowess and strength of spirit. What had once seemed a simple military challenge had transformed into a path of self-discovery. Erik began to understand that true victory lay in how he transformed every experience into a lesson, every battle into an opportunity for growth. However, the young Viking did not allow himself to be intoxicated by glory. He knew that achievements and recognition were fleeting. His spirit sought something more than earthly victories, something that transcended fame. He yearned for wisdom to unravel the mysteries of the world and the ways of the gods. Soon, Erik realized that for his continued journey, he needed something more than just a thirst for power. His next challenge was to discover the true meaning of his existence, something that went beyond battles and conquered lands, something he knew could only be achieved by finding a true connection with his spirit. After his triumphant victory and the widespread recognition of his name, Erik felt he had reached the pinnacle of warrior glory. Yet an inexplicable emptiness began to grow within him. He sensed there was something more, an unexplored depth beyond battlefields and conquered lands. One star-filled night, while contemplating the future, he heard a legend of a reclusive shaman dwelling in the mountain heights, a man credited with imparting wisdom that transcended ordinary understanding. Driven by insatiable curiosity and a yearning for a higher purpose, Erik resolved to embark on a solitary journey in search of this sage. The path to the mountain peaks was fraught with harsh trials. Erik faced dangers that tested his physical strength and moral fortitude. But each step brought him closer to something greater than mere survival. The biting wind, treacherous cliffs, and overwhelming solitude could not break his iron will. After many days of travel, he finally reached a humble hut where he met the shaman. The elder, with discerning eyes full of ancient wisdom, looked at Erik and, silently gesturing to a spot, invited him to sit. In the ensuing silence, Erik began to understand that true wisdom is born not from words, but from the ability to listen to the world around and contemplate its mysteries. The shaman then began profound teachings on the cycle of life and the laws of nature, explaining that every warrior, regardless of their strength, must understand the harmony between physical might and spirituality. Erik, who had previously believed his strength was measured only by the number of enemies defeated, realized that true power lay in self-mastery and understanding the flow of the cosmos. For several weeks, Erik absorbed valuable lessons on patience, wisdom, and the importance of unity with the earth and elements. But the shaman also warned him, "Your harshest trial will come when you must use your strength not for destruction, but for protection." And then Erik understood that his journey was still far from over. After long months spent in the mountains, steeped in the shaman's teachings, Erik returned home, transformed, wiser, and more purposeful. However, the world beyond the mountains was still gripped by anxiety. During his absence, a new threat had emerged, a coalition of enemy tribes united with the sole purpose of wiping Erik's village off the face of the earth and seizing his lands. Hearing this news, the fire within him rekindled. The lessons learned in the mountains were not forgotten, but war was inevitable, and Erik understood that his role as a leader and warrior would be crucial. His axe was sharpened, and his spirit stronger than ever. He was ready to lead his people into the greatest battle of their lives. The initial clashes were brutal and bloody. The enemy tribes, well organized and aggressive, attacked with relentless fury, but Erik, now possessing strategic insight, understood that victory could not be achieved by brute force alone. He used his wisdom to anticipate enemy movements and plan every strike with surgical precision. He led his people with courage and compassion, forging unity not only through arms, but also through mutual trust and honor. One of the fiercest battles unfolded in the hills north of his village, where superior enemy forces attempted to encircle them. Erik employed a tactic of a sudden night attack, extinguishing campfires and silently repositioning his troops. When the enemy least expected it, the Vikings descended upon them, inflicting a crushing defeat. Despite the initial successes, the hardest test was yet to come. The enemy coalition, weakened but not broken, gathered its remaining forces for a final assault. The tribal chieftains, now led by a warrior even more formidable than Ragnar, prepared to besiege Erik's village, hoping to crush him once and for all. Erik's lands faced imminent devastation, and he understood that this battle would define his legacy. In anticipation of the decisive clash, Erik looked at his people and recalled the shaman's words. A true warrior fights not only for conquest, but for the protection of what is dear. He then raised his sword to the sky and, with a battle cry, led his people into the bloodiest battle. The final battle against the enemy coalition was truly epic, lasting several days. The battlefield was stained with blood and covered in dust, and the air vibrated with the clang of swords and furious shouts. Erik, leading his warriors, fought with unstoppable ferocity, his axe mercilessly crushing anyone who dared to approach. But as the battle dragged on, he began to realize that victory would not depend solely on physical strength. His strength was waning, his warriors were exhausted, and the enemy seemed increasingly unyielding. It was then that Erik, in a moment of enlightenment, understood that victory would require more than just the destruction of enemies. It would require sacrifice. In an act of unparalleled courage, Erik made a decision that would change the course of history. He realized that to save his people and achieve ultimate victory, he needed to challenge the enemy chieftain to single combat. He left his troops and advanced towards the coalition's leader, who awaited him with an arrogant smirk. The battle between them was intense, demanding strength, skill, and tactical genius. Erik, though wounded, used all the wisdom gained in the mountains, observing his enemy's every move, waiting for the opportune moment. And finally, with a precise strike, he felled the enemy chieftain, ending the coalition's existence once and for all. However, the triumph did not come without cost. Erik had sustained serious wounds and his strength was waning. Despite the physical suffering, the victory was absolute. After the enemy leader's surrender, the remaining tribes laid down their arms or fled, leaving Erik's settlement secure. His name became legend, symbolizing not only power, but also self-sacrifice for the protection of his people. The village was saved, but Erik realized that the true struggle was not against external enemies, but against his inner fears and weaknesses. He had conquered not just territory or recognition, but had achieved true greatness of spirit. In his exhaustion, he understood that a true leader is one who places the interests of others above their own, and that the most important battle is always the battle with oneself. After the glorious victory, the villagers hailed Erik as a hero. Nevertheless, he understood that the main challenges were just beginning. The wounds of war ran deep, and though victory had secured his people's safety, the future remained uncertain. With peace now established in the village, reconstruction was needed, and Erik saw himself not merely as a warrior, but as a wise ruler. He understood that leadership was not just about commanding in battle, but about making difficult decisions, caring for the well-being of his subjects, and skillfully guiding them through times of prosperity and adversity. In the following months, he dedicated himself to rebuilding the village, aiding the wounded, facilitating the construction of new homes, and forging alliances with neighboring tribes that had once been enemies. But the true test of Erik's leadership came when a new threat emerged, unlike any before. A great famine swept the region, and the harvest failed. The very survival of his village was at stake. Many suggested abandoning their homes in search of a better fortune, but Erik understood that the solution lay not in flight, but in bravely and wisely confronting the challenge. He gathered his best hunters and farmers, and together they devised more effective hunting methods and sought alternative food sources. Erik also organized expeditions to establish trade relations with distant tribes, bringing vital resources for survival. The famine, which had seemed an insurmountable force of nature, was defeated thanks to the unity and determination of Erik's people. In time, Erik's village not only recovered, but achieved unprecedented prosperity. Wealth began to flow in, and Erik's fame spread throughout the region. He came to be seen not only as a fearless warrior, but also as a visionary leader who had successfully guided his people to peace and well-being. However, beyond material achievements, Erik's greatest legacy was what he taught his people. The true strength of a leader lies not in winning battles, but in the ability to unite and guide people through times of crisis. Thus, Erik's name became a legend not only because of his martial exploits, but also because of the example of courage, self-sacrifice, and wisdom he left for future generations. Despite the village's prosperity, Erik understood that the Viking spirit was indomitable and the yearning for new lands and opportunities was inevitable. One starry night, he gathered his best companions and announced that it was time to sail beyond the known waters. He believed that by exploring distant lands, they could not only increase their wealth, but also gain knowledge of other cultures, solidifying their position as one of the most powerful clans in the region. So, in ships built of sturdy timber, with carefully prepared provisions, Erik and his crew set sail into the unknown, leaving their families behind with a promise to return with glory. The journey proved arduous. Treacherous winds and raging seas tested the resilience of Erik and his crew. For weeks, they battled storms that nearly capsized their ships, and hunger began to plague them. But Erik, with his unwavering leadership, maintained high spirits, reminding everyone of the prospects of fertile lands and untold treasures. Finally, after numerous trials, they sighted the outline of an unknown shore. Before them lay a land of green hills, dense forests, and abundant rivers. However, the tranquility of the landscape was deceptive, for they soon discovered they were not alone. The local tribes, wary and hostile, were preparing to defend their lands from the arriving strangers. Erik understood that a clash was inevitable, but he also realized that war was not always the best solution. He attempted to open a dialogue with the chieftains of the local tribes, offering alliances and trade. However, tensions were high, and negotiations reached a stalemate. When the first attack began, Erik led his warriors with his usual courage, but with a new strategy: capture without destruction. He ordered his warriors to incapacitate enemies rather than kill them, showing respect for life and laying the groundwork for a future alliance. This wise act proved decisive. After the defeat of the local defenders, Erik showed mercy to their chieftains and again offered peace, this time with gestures of goodwill that impressed even the most unyielding. Thus, the first Viking colony beyond their homeland was established, and Erik once again proved that true strength lies in unity and the ability to turn enemies into allies. The triumph of the new settlement not only increased its wealth, but also drew the keen attention of powerful kingdoms far away. Messengers arrived, spreading news of a grand confederation forming, intent on resisting Viking expansion. Erik realized this alliance could pose a deadly threat not only to his newly established colony, but also to his homeland. The situation demanded a delicate approach. Retreat would mean losing everything gained, but advancing required not only courage, but brilliant strategy. Without wasting time, Erik accepted the challenge. He requested reinforcements from his home village and began preparing an army that would be legendary. In anticipation of the confrontation, Erik proved himself not only a valiant warrior, but also a skilled strategist. He meticulously analyzed enemy troop movements, sending scouts to study their tactics and identify weaknesses. When the massive enemy army advanced towards him, Erik divided his forces into smaller detachments, setting ambushes in the familiar terrain. In one of the key battles, he personally led a sudden night attack, capturing the enemy's main camp and throwing their ranks into complete disarray. The victory was resounding, but Erik understood it was only the beginning. The Confederation's leaders remained alive, and a decisive battle was inevitable. The final battle unfolded on a vast field where the armies of both sides clashed. The fighting was merciless, the clang of swords and battle cries echoing throughout the surroundings. Erik, at the very heart of the chaos, seemed the embodiment of elemental force, inspiring his warriors with unparalleled bravery. At a pivotal moment, he engaged the Confederation's chieftain in a duel on whose outcome depended the fate of their entire people. The struggle was evenly matched, both fighters displaying incredible skill. But at the last moment, Erik found a vulnerability and delivered a fatal blow to his opponent. After this, the enemy forces fled, and the victory was absolute. Erik had once again proven that his leadership was key to turning challenges into triumphs. After the victory in the battle for the kingdoms, Erik's name became legendary. Poets sang of his exploits, and envoys from distant lands sought his favor, offering alliances and trade agreements. His colony prospered, and his home village became a center of power and commerce. However, Erik understood that fame brought new challenges. Rivals lurked in the shadows, envious of his rise, and even within his inner circle, some doubted his leadership. The world, as before, remained an invisible battlefield where wisdom and vigilance became his most potent weapons. Erik realized that it was not enough to merely react to emerging threats. He had to anticipate them. Therefore, he set about strengthening his system of governance. He established councils of local chieftains where every decision was discussed and approved, uniting the clan with a common purpose. He also dispatched expeditions to explore new lands and resources, ensuring his people always had something to offer in trade and alliances. At the same time, he did not forget his warrior roots. In regular training, he taught his warriors not only to fight, but also to understand strategy and maintain discipline, forging an army that combined intellect with invincibility. Despite all precautions, a new threat was looming from the north. News of a giant enemy fleet spread through the settlements like wildfire. These were rebellious Vikings, led by a long-standing rival of Erik, seeking to overthrow him and usurp his place. Erik understood that this clash would be different. It was not just about defending territories, but about preserving the legacy he had built. He summoned his allies, prepared his troops, and before setting out, addressed his people with an inspiring speech. He spoke of sacrifice, courage, and a dream of a future where their children would live in freedom and prosperity. As the sun set, Erik led his ships towards a battle that would determine not only his fate, but the fate of all who trusted him. The icy wind bit like a blade as Erik's fleet advanced toward the enemy. He knew the outcome of the battle would depend not only on strength, but also on wit and courage. His scouts had provided valuable intelligence. The enemy fleet outnumbered his and consisted of fierce warriors, but it lacked the discipline Erik had instilled in his own people. He gathered his captains for a war council on the main deck and devised a daring plan. Instead of engaging in a direct fight, he would use his knowledge of sea currents and terrain to divide and weaken the enemy forces. At dawn, Erik put his plan into action. He dispatched small boats to lure part of the enemy fleet toward treacherous reefs where larger ships could run aground. Meanwhile, Erik's main forces launched a coordinated strike on the vulnerable flanks of the enemy fleet. Chaos erupted in the enemy ranks. Erik, with unparalleled skill, led the front line, inspiring his warriors with every precise strike and strategic decision. At a crucial moment, he spotted his rival chieftain on a burning ship, and they engaged in an epic duel on the slippery, blood-soaked deck. The battle was fierce. Swords clanged and sparks flew with every clash of metal. The rival, driven by ambition and hatred, fought like a man possessed. However, Erik maintained his composure. With one precise blow, he disarmed his opponent and brought him to the ground. He could have killed him on the spot, but with an unexpected gesture, he offered him mercy. The rival, humiliated and defeated, swore allegiance to him. This magnanimous act not only secured Erik's victory, but also solidified his reputation as a just leader, capable of uniting even enemies. After the last enemy ship vanished beyond the horizon, Erik's subjects openly celebrated. However, Erik himself did not succumb to the widespread joy. He understood perfectly well that this victory was merely another step on the path to building a lasting and prosperous future. Gazing at the calm waters, he noted that the very sea, which had witnessed so many bloody battles, was now tranquil, as if nature itself acknowledged the end of an era of conflict. With unwavering confidence that despite the trials to come, his people were ready to face them, for they possessed something no weapon could conquer: unity and a shared purpose. He returned to his colony. Following his triumphant victory in the northern waters, Erik stood before his people as a hero. However, the euphoria of victory quickly gave way to the urgent need for reconstruction. A significant number of ships had been lost, and the coastal areas, damaged during the conflict, required immediate restoration. With a strategic mind, Erik gathered the best craftsmen and influential chieftains to lead the rebuilding efforts. He not only spurred the restoration of infrastructure, but also invested in bolstering the morale of his people. Celebrations were held to mark the establishment of peace, and the songs of bards echoed throughout the region, praising the courage of Erik and his people. With the advent of a temporary calm, Erik decided to consolidate his achievements by creating something greater. He convened a council of chieftains not only from his colony, but also from nearby lands where his influence had spread. In an inspiring speech, he laid out his vision: a unified kingdom where various clans and tribes could coexist peacefully under one banner, share resources, ensure mutual protection, and prosper together. This idea generated enthusiasm, but also some skepticism. To convince the doubters, Erik proposed marriage alliances and mutually beneficial trade agreements, demonstrating his exceptional skills in both politics and warfare. The founding of the new kingdom was not merely symbolic, it led to significant improvements in the lives of his people. Erik implemented efficient governance systems, ensuring collective decision-making under his firm leadership. He established safe trade routes connecting his lands with distant kingdoms, fostering an influx of wealth and cultural exchange. Furthermore, he encouraged the development of education and the arts, believing that an educated populace was the foundation of a strong and prosperous kingdom. Soon, Erik's name became associated not only with victories in battle, but also with wisdom and prosperity. However, he understood that every step toward strengthening power brought new challenges, and that the true test for a leader was just beginning. Years passed, and the kingdom Erik had forged became a symbol of strength and unity in the northern lands. Under his wise rule, tribes that had once warred now lived in harmony as allies, and tales of a prosperous, fearless, and wise people spread far and wide. Erik, now advanced in years, had left the days of battle behind, but his warrior spirit remained unbroken. He dedicated his days to training a new generation of warriors, sharing his strategic expertise and life lessons. A leader is both a warrior and a guardian, he would say, his eyes shining. And true victory lies in leaving behind something greater than yourself. As time progressed, Erik began to prepare for the transfer of power. He gathered his sons and advisors to instill in them the values that had guided him throughout his life: justice, courage, and wisdom. He understood that for the kingdom to endure for centuries, it had to be governed by those who understood not only warfare, but also the importance of maintaining peace. In a solemn ceremony, Erik passed his legendary axe to his eldest son, Iolo, proclaiming him the kingdom's new ruler. However, he emphasized that his role as mentor and advisor would not end there. "Your strength is not in weaponry," he declared as the crowd cheered, "but in the trust of your people." In his final years, Erik settled in a humble hut by the sea, which had witnessed so many of his victories. He spent his days in contemplation, recording the history of his exploits and receiving guests from distant lands eager to hear his wise counsel. On his last night, as the northern lights painted the sky, Erik gazed at the horizon, sensing the approaching end. He passed away peacefully, leaving behind a prosperous kingdom, an immortal legend, and a people inspired by his courage and foresight. His name would be passed down through generations as that of the young Viking who became king, the leader who united clans, and the man who forged a legacy as grand as the northern skies. Erik was more than just a historical figure. He was a symbol of what every Viking could aspire to be. And so his story continues, told in every corner of the frozen lands.